Please welcome Hillel Neuer, Executive Director of United Nations Watch.
Distinguished members of the Diplomatic Corps, ladies and gentlemen, friends, welcome to the 14th Geneva Summit for Human Rights and Democracy. My name is Hillel Neuer, and I'm the Executive Director of United Nations Watch. On behalf of our 25 NGO co-sponsors, it is my honor to open the 2022 edition of our annual World Assembly of human rights dissidents, pro-democracy activists, former political prisoners, and family members and representatives of current political prisoners. I want to begin by thanking our partners, a cross-regional coalition of human rights organizations, for helping us to organize this summit and to unite courageous champions of human rights and democracy. I also want to thank our incredible Shayla Raka, Chloe Higen, Eileen Ergil Amsalem, Dylan Rogers, and our entire team of staff and volunteers for their dedicated work and long hours over months to make this Geneva Summit a great success. We meet across the street from the United Nations Human Rights Council to shine a global spotlight on urgent situations of human rights and to place them on the international agenda. Now, all too often, sadly, the UN elevates and empowers the oppressors, for example, by electing them to human rights bodies. Well, here at the Geneva Summit, we choose to elevate and empower the oppressed, those who dare to speak out in the name of freedom and human dignity for their people. And I have to say that we meet today next to the Human Rights Council at a fascinating moment. For only the second time in history, a member state of the UNHRC is likely to be removed tomorrow. The United States announced that working together with Ukraine and European states, they will move to suspend Russia from the Council. Yesterday, U.S. Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield said the following, quote, "Russia should not have a position of authority in a body whose purpose is to promote respect for human rights. Not only is this the height of hypocrisy, it is dangerous. Russia is using its membership on the Council as a platform for propaganda to suggest it has a legitimate concern for human rights. Russia's participation on the Council hurts its credibility, undermines the entire UN, and is just plain wrong." Wow. This is exactly what we have been saying all along when we first tried to stop Russia, China, and Cuba from getting elected in the first place in 2020. But we couldn't get any governments to say these words. And from day one of the invasion in February, we called on Russia to be expelled. Now, so we hope the resolution tomorrow passes with a large majority, and that's one more reason why the world needs to hear eyewitness testimony today from our speaker, Olga Ivazovska, a Ukrainian civil society leader who was forced to flee Kiev not long ago. But this should be a larger turning point. After Russia is removed, we urge the same to be done to other dictatorships on the Council. And after we hear from Joey Su on Hong Kong and from Tenzin Tsundu, a Tibetan refugee and activist, I am sure you will agree that China does not belong on a human rights council. And after we hear from Hamlet Lavastida, an artist from Cuba and a political prisoner just released in September, I'm sure you'll agree that the Cuban dictatorship does not belong on a human rights council. And after we hear from Miguel Otero of Venezuela, whose leading newspaper, El Nacional, was targeted by the Maduro regime, I believe you'll agree that this narco-criminal state does not belong on a human rights council. And I urge everyone to sign the petition that we launched, headed by our board member, Ambassador Diego Aria, on our website, unwatch.org/expel Maduro. 180,000 people have already signed. Now, what the U.S. ambassador said about Russia applies perfectly to HRC members like Eritrea, which has slave labor, Libya, which tortures African migrants, Mauritania, which still has slavery, Pakistan, which hosts terrorists, Somalia with female genital mutilation. These too must all be removed from the Human Rights Council. Indeed, regular people around the world ask, why does a Human Rights Council include so many non-democracies? Today, it's 68% of the Council are non-democracies. Defenders of the system have a ready reply. We need a big tent, they say, so that countries with poor records can engage, learn, and improve. Well, we've heard this numerous times from foreign ministers and top diplomats on the record from several EU states. And I don't want to mention names, but we've heard this from a Swedish-speaking country, a Dutch-speaking country, and a Belgian-speaking country. Now, perhaps there is an argument that nations with spotty records but who actually wish to make progress can be embraced and given technical expertise, cooperation, for example, to train their judges and police. But does the United Nations have to keep electing the world's worst abusers, dictatorships whose only intent is to win a false badge of international legitimacy? So we ask all of those at the UN who propagate the big tent theory. Since Vladimir Putin's Russia was elected again and again to the Human Rights Council across the street over a decade, did he learn and improve? Or on the contrary, did Russia only assassinate more journalists, persecute more dissidents, and launch more deadly military invasions than ever before? Since China was elected repeatedly to the Human Rights Council, did the communist rulers of Beijing learn and improve, or did they only crush more dissidents like Liu Xiaobo than ever before? And I want to know, since Venezuela was elected again and again to this council, did Chavez and Maduro learn and improve, or on the contrary, did they only arrest, persecute, and jail more opposition leaders like Mayor Antonio Ledesma of Caracas? No, my friends, the big tent theory is a big lie. And so we hope that the removal of Russia tomorrow from the Human Rights Council will be a moment to affirm truth and moral clarity. Friends, the fact that we are meeting here today, hundreds of people together in one room with speakers flying in from able to travel here from Los Angeles to Dharamsala, from London to Zimbabwe, is something we cannot take for granted. After 2 very difficult years of the COVID-19 pandemic, I want to say how truly grateful we are to be able to meet in person. During these 2 years, many of us had to spend time in some form of social isolation due to quarantine or lockdowns, and we learned how painful that can be. That experience might help us to appreciate the infinitely greater suffering of innocent men and women who are severely and arbitrarily denied their freedom. And we're going to hear compelling testimony today from former political prisoners. We'll hear from Pham Minh Hoang, a scholar and former political prisoner from Vietnam, and from Hopewell Shinono, a journalist from Zimbabwe and recent political prisoner. And Timothy Cho, who was imprisoned and tortured in North Korea, managed to escape and is today a human rights activist. And we'll hear about current political prisoners. While Russia sits across the street as a member of the Human Rights Council, we'll hear shortly about Alexei Navalny, the jailed Russian opposition leader, from his chief of staff, Leonid Volkov. And while China sits across the street as a member of the Council, we'll hear from Sophie Lo about her husband, the human rights lawyer Ding Jiaxi, a political prisoner in China, and we'll hear from Rushan Abbas about the plight of the Uyghurs, including her sister, Dr. Gulshan Abbas, another political prisoner in China. And while the Iranian regime sits on the UN Commission on the Status of Women, which they just joined a week ago, we'll hear from Mariam Klarin, daughter of Nahi Tajavi, a women's rights activist imprisoned in Iran. And Belarus also sits on that commission, but we'll hear from Tatiana Khomich about her sister Maria Kolesnikova, a woman human rights defender imprisoned in Belarus. Nicaragua sits on the UN committee that oversees human rights NGOs in New York. But we'll hear from Berta Valle about her husband, Felix Maradiaga, a speaker here at this summit in 2019, who was thrown into prison for daring to run for president against the dictator Daniel Ortega. Saudi Arabia in Paris sits on the UNESCO Human Rights Committee, but we'll hear from Arij al-Sadan about her brother, Saudi political prisoner Abdulrahman al-Sadan, who has been punished for tweeting for his peaceful use of social media to call out Saudi human rights abuses. And we will hear from Bobi Wine, Ugandan opposition leader, 2021 presidential candidate. Last but not least, we'll present our Women's Rights Award to Zarifa Ghaffari, youngest mayor in Afghanistan, survivor of several assassination attempts, and our Courage Award will be presented to Enes Kanter, Freedom, NBA basketball player, and human rights activist. So friends, it's a powerful program with inspiring people to inform us about vital issues going on today in the world. Your participation today matters. We need you to amplify the voices of our human rights heroes that you will hear. Please share our Geneva Summit posts, which you can find on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Make sure to add your own voice, together with the hashtag Geneva Summit 2022. Follow our remarkable speakers on their own accounts and share their testimonies. It is not your duty to finish the work of perfecting the world, but everyone is obliged to do their part. Thank you. For our first speaker today, I would like now to invite Leonid Volkov to please join me on the stage. Welcome.
Thank you.
Let me introduce Leonid, whom we heard at the UN yesterday. We had a small taster event for diplomats at the United Nations, which was really very powerful. And Leonid was one of the speakers. Leonid Volkov is chief of staff to the imprisoned Russian opposition leader, Alexei Navalny. He was campaign manager for Navalny's Moscow mayoral campaign in 2013, as well as for his bid to get onto the presidential ballot in 2018. He created and led Team Navalny's network of regional offices in 45 of Russia's largest cities. Since 2019, Leonid Volkov operates from abroad, which is not surprising given that the Russian regime is currently pursuing him with seven different politically motivated criminal cases. An IT professional by background, Leonid is also the co-founder of the Internet Protection Society, Russia's leading digital rights NGO. So Leonid, when we talk about Russia today, for so many people in this room and around the world who are watching, there are many questions that people want to know about. But I want to start with, maybe if we can, first talk about Navalny, who's someone the world also knows about, someone to remind people who was poisoned, and I guess he went into a coma and almost died and was taken to Germany and managed to survive, and poisoned by the regime, and yet came back to Russia after being poisoned. So really courageous people. We also had Vladimir Kara-Murza, similar person who lives in Russia, poisoned twice. So Navalny went back to Russia and then fake trial and thrown into prison. Let me begin by asking a little bit about Alexei Navalny. How is he doing? And maybe you could tell us a little bit. We know there was another famous fake trial in February. Maybe you could tell us a bit about that.
Well, Alexei was just delivered a new sentence. He was awarded with a 9 years sentence in a maximum security prison, which is not a good news, definitely, but also not a bad news. It doesn't mean anything, frankly, because he is President Putin's personal political prisoner, and all these legal formalities don't really mean a lot. So we all know that Russia, well, the largest country in the world, is also a very small country. It's too small for these two men. So it has been Putin versus Navalny for a few years, and it has become very clear that only one of them could walk free through the country. Navalny always knew, even when he returned back to Russia a year ago, that his sentence will be a life sentence, but the question is for the duration of whose life. And, well, we believe actually that President Putin, who 6 weeks ago started a criminal and atrocious war against Ukraine, miscalculated gravely, and he shortened his term. He really very much decreased his own chances to die in Kremlin, to die staying in power, which was always his plan. So now we believe chances are very high that this plan will fail. President Putin has many plans. They don't have to be taken for granted. President Putin had a plan to kill Alexei Navalny with Novichok, and he failed. He had a plan to take over Kyiv in 96 hours. He failed. He had a plan to make Russia one of the world 5 top economies, and he failed also. So pretty much everything he does, he doesn't manage to accomplish because of the very inefficient and corrupt system he's built. So we are quite sure that Putin's plan to keep Alexei Navalny in prison forever will also fail. And that's why Alexei remains very brave and strong, and his morale is high and his spirit is high. He also works a lot. He remains the acting head of our organization, the Anti-Corruption Foundation. He just recently, actually, he used his last speech in the court to announce new plans, the international expansion, because the Anti-Corruption Foundation was always used to be a Russian organization, focused on corruption inside Russia. He now announced that we are launching ACF International, the International Anti-Corruption Organization, and he does it, well, right away from prison. We are able to stay in touch with him. He follows the agenda, he follows the news, so everything is going to be fine.
Good. Well, given that he's in a penal colony, he's still in the penal colony, or is he somewhere else?
Yes.
Yeah.
He's in penal colony.
Well, given that he's in a penal colony in Russia and subject to a totalitarian dictator, that he can remain optimistic is incredible.
We always say that optimism is a job requirement with our organization. I mean, otherwise, you just wouldn't be able to survive. Otherwise, you can be able to work. So there are so many devastating news from Russia. There are so many reasons to get depressed, to feel depressed. So to carry on and to hope for a better future for our poor country, we actually need to remain optimistic, and that's a very important feeling that we try to foster among members of our team.
Terrific. And speaking about your team, was it your team that recently exposed the stepdaughter of Lavrov?
Yes,
there was
indeed.
This Twitter thread that I saw about a young woman in sort of living a luxury lifestyle. Maybe you can tell us about that.
Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov was leading the head of the United Russia, Putin's party. He was number 1 on the party list at the parliamentary elections in September. And it was then, in September 2021, when we have launched a huge investigation about his actual wealth and about the ridiculous fact that Foreign Minister Lavrov still very much respected in diplomatic corps for some reason.
We think he's a suave, prestigious international actor. That's the image that one gets.
The person who always lies. That's the only image he has, and the only image he deserves. But the fact that our investigation has revealed that he is actually owned by oligarch Deripaska. And that's a very important insight into how Russian corruption works. These oligarchs, they try to distance themselves from the government. They try to pretend they are successful and wealthy businessmen of their own, but there are actually always very intimate ties. And our investigation revealed that once Lavrov flies somewhere, to Geneva, to Dubai, to New York, whatever, a private jet owned by Deripaska follows the minister's jet and carrying his second family, his mistress and her daughter, this stepdaughter.
Are you saying that a corrupt dictator might come to Geneva?
Lavrov is coming.
Visiting Geneva, I can't believe this. I can't believe this.
Lavrov is still very much welcome everywhere, and that's a huge problem. So Deripaska is paying all his bills and so on. It was a very important insight in the corruption, but it went unnoticed, pretty much, because we done it in Russian for the Russian audience, and it looks like Russian audience is already kind of used to it. But then, after this very lengthy and well-documented investigation, when we just launched one Twitter thread in English on this, like in February. This was like, this blew up, yeah, and this led actually to the fact that, for instance, her assets, this Lavrov's stepdaughter's assets in London were frozen, and so on and so on. This actually educated us a lot about like international impact that we are also able to achieve, and this was one of the motivations to scale up the Anti-Corruption Foundation to the international level.
So in this case, the top leadership can actually feel the sting of sanctions in a very personal and direct way.
Indeed, indeed. And by the way, yesterday US announced that they would include Putin's daughters to the next version of the sanction list, and we welcome it very much. Of course, I'm not sure that Putin's daughters actually own some properties in the West, albeit Maria has younger daughter, his elder daughter, used to be married to a Dutch citizen for a period of time, and she used to live in the Netherlands. They probably don't have properties that could be seized, but it's a very important symbolic move. It's a very important symbolic move that means that we are going after Putin personally. We realize how huge is his very personal guilt in the inception of this bloody war. Also, that's why yesterday we published another Twitter thread urging the West to sanction Alina Kabaeva, his actual wife, his mistress, and the mother of his two youngest children, who is not only a personal relation to Putin, but she is also the chairman of the board of the National Media Group, which is the largest media in Russia and the largest source of propaganda. So
is
actually,
that the Channel One, for example?
It is Channel One, it is Live
someone
News.
stood with that famous poster
exactly.
A few weeks ago.
And
yeah.
many others. So very, like 60% of state-controlled Russian media belong to this national media group where Alina Kabaeva is chairman of the board. So she is, it also shows how important propaganda is for Putin's regime, so that he actually entrusted the propaganda machine to be run by his most important confidant. And so we are very sure that she also has to be sanctioned.
Right. Coming back to Navalny for a moment, I should mention, as you mentioned at the United Nations yesterday, that we had the privilege last year, we were online because of the pandemic. Our 13th Geneva Summit was online, but we gave our Courage Award last year to Alexei Navalny. Of course, he's in prison, so his daughter was able to receive it. Her speech went viral on the internet, was seen well over 1 million times. Did that award matter to him at all? He's in prison, he's in Russia, there's an award given online in Geneva by 25 human rights groups. Did that make a difference at all? Does it matter?
Yeah, as I told yesterday during the UN opening session, it meant a lot for us because it had a very symbolic meaning of anti-corruption agenda, anti-corruption fighters to be admitted to the human rights family. Because this is something that we tried to demonstrate actually for many years, showcasing the origins and ways of Russian corruption, that corruption always leads to enormous